Well, it's 7 o'clock, so we are live on Facebook. I'm Michael Strong from expanseonline.co with When School's Not Working, with my illustrious co-hosts, Kath Fraze and Andrew Sachs. And we have as our guest, Scott Van Beck tonight. So Scott, welcome.
Thanks, great to be here.
Well, I kind of feel like diving in. And so tell us a little bit about your history, what you used to do and what you do today and how you got from A to B.
Yeah, so I worked for the Houston Independent School District from 1984 to 2008. I started as a teacher and I left as a region superintendent. I had 60 schools and about 54,000 kids that I was responsible for on the west side of HISD. And in 2008, I was recruited to leave the district and head up, at that time, the largest educational nonprofit in Houston, Houston A+ Challenge. And so we worked with classroom teachers and principals on school improvement projects. We also did a lot of convening around educational topics. And we also created a personalized learning lab school called A+ Up, which was a 3-year pilot project that we partnered with Houston museums, and it was primarily for 11, 12, 13-year-old learners. And in 2018, my wife and I moved from Houston to Montpelier, Vermont, and that's where we live now. I worked for 3 years with the Jason Project, Jason Learning, and helping out a friend, Eleanor Smalley, with building a footprint in New England around STEM services. And then a friend of mine, Matt Barnes, talked me into becoming a co-founder of the Education Game. And so he works in Houston, I work up here in Vermont, but we try to help parents primarily figure out how to get their kids learning during the pandemic. But our real goal is to help parents form smarter and stronger learners inside of their children. And so that's the work that Matt and I are into right now. But Michael, I need to say this at the outset. I was thinking about this today. I really consider most of my career inside of what was considered to be at the time a pretty successful urban school system, HISD. But I really consider it to be a failure. And I'll tell you why. When I started teaching in HISD in 1984, I look back to see what the NAEP data, the nation's report card, right? What the nation's performance was in reading and math. And when I left HISD in 2008, and in fact, when I left Houston A+ Challenge in 2018, do you know what that line looked like between 1984 and either 2008 and 2018?
Either flat or slightly down.
Flat, totally flat. And if you want to, if you want to see somebody that's bummed out, think about pouring 25 years in HISD and then 35 years in Texas education, and see, all of your work come out as a flat line. So I started to get convinced when I was in the system that it was indeed the system that wasn't working. And now I'm further convinced that we've got a system that just doesn't work for kids. And I think we pretend that it doesn't work for poor kids or kids that are black or brown, but truth be known, that system didn't work for my kids. And my kids did really well in that system. But if they look back now at what they could have learned versus what they did learn, there is a huge, huge gap.
So I'm so delighted that you brought up the failure. I was, in my mental model of you is that you're kind of the highest level defector from the system. It's sort of like, the Cold War era, we got, this, colonel or something, or, maybe even a general to kind of come over to the dark side.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
but, I think you really
delighted.
nailed something. Sorry, Michael, I think you really nailed something please. There, right? He really nailed that. Like, they are learning something at school. We're not saying they're not learning anything, but like there is such an opportunity cost, right? There's a lot of upside that we're just really not capitalizing on. And it's a system that is keeping the status quo. And, all of us have, limited number of children that are just also precious to us. Why would we want them to be in a place that's going to keep them, like at maybe, let's say 2/3 their capacity, like when we can create a system that would really unlock their capacity and potential. And why aren't we doing that? We have all the skills, we have the know-how, we have the people, we have the care, we love our children, yet we are leaving them in this system that is really shooting them in the foot.
I think it's generous at 2/3.
I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna say it's harming our kids. It's harming our high performers, right? One of my motivations behind starting Noble Explorers, Scott, is I knew that teamwork and collaboration was one of the most important things to learn in life, right? That as a high-tech leader, that this is one of the hardest things to master. We've got science that proves that this is how we progress, this is how we learn. And yet my daughter, who is incredibly talented, right, and motivated, was learning not to collaborate with other people, not to listen to others, that she had all the answers, right? That other people were something that might slow her down or hurt her grade, right? That these people that not only, we talk about wanting to bring our kids up with empathy, except we beat it out of them. We talk about wanting our kids to be creative, yet we close their minds. We talk about it, we want our kids to collaborate, and yet we call it cheating. And I don't want to say the system damages all of our kids. And I think we'd be better off giving them nothing rather than putting them through the system that exists today.
Well, rather than kind of go, so as you see, Scott, we're all pretty critical. I haven't even let loose fully yet. But Scott, I mean, Andrew is a good proxy for my, criticism. But I'd love to hear, why is the system not working? You've got a huge amount of experience and wisdom from the system. Why is the system not working? And yeah, what could it take to make it work, if anything?
The system, well, let me just talk about two ways that the system isn't working. And it has, by the way, it hasn't worked for quite a while. One is we try to fit learners into the same square peg when they come to these places called school. And what I mean by that is unless you're a special ed student, and the schools that I'm familiar with still today here in Vermont, with all of their talk around flexible pathways and such. The reality for most learners is that there is a set of curriculum expectations that have been approved by state legislatures state boards of education and school boards. When you walk into a public school in this country, depending upon what state you live in, there is a prescription for your learning. Now, if you're a kid that has an interest in playing and inventing an improved electric guitar, I just finished writing a blog on Eddie Van Halen. If you're Eddie Van Halen, American schools aren't really for you, because what you need is you need time to work on your interest-based learning. Because there's so much curricular prescription and restriction inside of these places we call school, folks like Eddie Van Halen or just, Tiger Woods, the best soccer player, the best singers, at best, they might have 45 minutes a day to work on their passion. And I don't think that's working for a lot of kids and a lot of families. The second thing that I'll say is I am now convinced that these places that we call school, if you aren't getting, well, let's just put it this way, if you're getting the short end of the stick, you're never going to get anything more than the short end of the stick. I've watched this equity push for 35 years. And when I left Houston, the same kids looked the same, color of skin, economic status. They were not provided an equitable opportunity to success. Now in Texas, particularly with Hispanic learners, there's been a historical reason for that. And that is that people who look like me really don't want Hispanics to gain really any type of power, economic, political, whatever. And if you take a look at some of the English language learner regulations inside of the state of Texas, you almost are convinced that things are stacked up against English language learners still today in 2021. Things really haven't improved for those kids. Well, definitely since 1984, when I started in the teaching business. So I would say those two factors, this over prescription of curriculum, and also the inability to provide equitable opportunity, are probably the two main drivers, at least in my mind, why public schools aren't working. And here's a news flash: they're not going to work.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm not wonderful that they aren't going to work, but I love clarity. If in order to solve the problem, we need first to get clarity on the problem. Mm-hmm. The equity thing is really huge. So before going to the equity thing, I want to follow on the prescriptive curriculum thing. So what I'm hearing you say is, as long as state legislatures require that a specified curriculum be taught, we can't meet the needs of all kids. Is that an accurate reflection, or did I get part of that wrong?
Yeah, I think we've got it, excuse my language, ass backward. Mm-hmm. So what most states do is they expect the learner, and I get it. There's a history there of, forming, good citizens and, kids needed to learn certain things to be, good Americans. I get that thought. But the fact of the matter is, we've got kids that are coming in at 8 o'clock and leaving at 3 from August to May that are spending time learning things that aren't going to be beneficial to them to be considered good Americans and good citizens. So I guess my answer to this is there is a tremendous, tremendous waste of time inside of our school system. And it is, I mean, we've got major problems in this country right now. And I think that is a big problem that if we can't fix, we're not, I don't think we can consider ourselves to be hopeful for the next generation.
So much to unpack here, but just, one way I'm very interested in the kind of long history of what happened. My sense is in the early 20th century, the one-room schoolhouse, teachers had incredible flexibility. They could basically do whatever they want and customize things. By the time you entered the 1980s, we had begun the kind of standards push. And so when you talk about no legislatures not being prescriptive, what's left of public education in the 21st century if legislators cannot be prescriptive regarding curriculum? If we basically eliminate all state standards.
Well, there was a book written back in the 80s that asked the question, is there a public for American public education? I think Dave Matthews might have written that, not the singer, but I forget, he was a CEO of some company. I want to turn that question around a bit. And the question that I want to ask is, who really is the public in public education? And I'm convinced today, not because I work for the education game, but because I watched this for a while, both in HISD and at Houston A+ Challenge, that if you really get down to it, the public are the parents and the families of the children learners. You can't convince me, again, that state legislators that look like me, in most states, by the way, have the best interest about kids who don't look like me. I think the folks that have the best interests are the adults that are closest to those children, and that just happens to be either their parents or their grandparents, aunts, uncles, whatever. So I think the first step that we need to make in this country is learning providers should no longer receive compensation from institutions known as states. I think everyone doesn't like the V word, but call it what you want to call it. I think with proper guidance, it's sort of like housing. You put money in the hands of poor families. There's a couple of research studies out this past week, one in Vancouver, that shows that no, those families don't squander that money. They go buy an apartment. They put a down payment on a place to live. I think the same thing can be said with educational resource. And that is that if we put money in the hands of families and we give them good guidance, the folks on this call would be great learning guides for those families. Those families are going to make, I think, better decisions, and most definitely different decisions than the decisions that state legislators make or state boards of education.
So what I'm hearing you say is minimally regulated school choice, vouchers, tuition tax credits, something like that. And the reason I specify minimally regulated is maybe health and safety, but no curriculum or minimal curriculum requirements associated with the education dollars?
Yeah, so at A+ Up, the personalized learning lab school we launched, we hired 2 learning coaches, and there were basically 3 expectations of those learning coaches. One was, we're going to give you a budget. We're going to give you some money. The second expectation is we're going to give you some expectations, because we're giving you money, and those expectations are connected to the money. And then the third thing, and you spoke to this, Michael, I would never consider myself in that project to be the superintendent. But I do agree with you that there has to be some critical friend about to make sure that everything is just on the up and up, right? But I dare say, you know, when we gave, we funded that at about $7,500 a kid. And the reason why we did that was the average per pupil expenditure that HISD was spending on their kids at that time. And we had about 50 kids, so I think that comes out roughly $400,000. The way that the learning coaches spent that $400,000 was very different than the way that $400,000 would have been spent in a place called HISD. And I think the biggest difference that we saw was all of the mid-management structure was basically tossed out. And what you had was learning coaches that dealt with learners. I mean, the progress that those 50 kids showed through that project was impressive. We promised the families that they would see a 1.5 years worth of growth for every year that they spent with us. So that was 4.5 years over 3 years. And people said, well, why are you testing? Why are you giving the state test to these kids? These kids don't have to take the state test. Well, we felt as though we had to, because we wanted a legitimate comparison, so people wouldn't, you know, just throw us out as quacks. 46 out of the 50 showed 4.5 years of growth. In fact, I think the average was 5.7 in reading and about 5.2 in math. So if anybody says that pulling kids out of school is going to stunt their learning growth, they're speaking poppycock.
And is that 5 years increase in 1 year, 5 years increase in 4 years, 5 years increase
over the 3 years?
Great. Before kind of inviting Andrew and Kath in to kind of go into this policy piece a little bit more, just when I have friends who are resistant to school choice, I would just like to use New York because it's dramatic, $30,000 per pupil expenditure. They say, look, if you had 5 kids at $30,000 per pop, you can make $150,000. Do you think you could do better with 5 kids than New York Public Schools? Or if you're really good, you could take 10 kids, make $300,000, and you know, it's ridiculous. And once you look at it, talking about eliminating the middlemen and all the waste and stuff, you know, educators, if they had the dollars directly in their pocket in New York City, 10 kids, $300,000, they could do better than the New York Public.
I'll tell you a quick story. The first year, we had 2 learning coaches. One was a literacy expert, the other was a math expert. And they basically planned the budget. They decided that they were going to pay themselves $100,000. $100,000 now, right? I don't know of a teacher in HISD that makes $100,000 still today. At the end of the first year, the math data came back and it wasn't good. And the math coach stepped away on her own volition because she looked at her data and there was absolutely no one to blame other than herself. She resigned. Now, again, I tell that story because I was in HISD for 25 years. I was around at least 11 other districts for 10 years when I was a Houston A+ Challenge. That type of story just doesn't happen in the traditional school system. That type of, it goes beyond accountability, right? It goes into responsibility. Accountability is something that someone does to you. Responsibility is something that you do to yourself.
I would call it honor, good old-fashioned honor. Because the equity discussion, once we get into it, could easily take over the rest of the time. Andrew and Kath, anything else in the policy discussion before we shift over to equity?
I thank you for your candor, Scott. I think, you know, seeing the, understanding those.
Andrew, I live in Vermont, so it's really hard to find me up here. So that's one of the reasons I became a lot more honest when I
Witness
moved up
protection
here.
Program.
Right? Yeah,
Wait, wasn't he in Breaking Bad? Wasn't he in New Hampshire? Was he in Vermont or New Hampshire? I'm not sure which of the ones. But like, they're coming for you, Scott. Trust me, they got the people looking for you. You better not go visit. You better not make any phone calls, right? I think you know, I shared before we really got going about the story of my wife, who was a teacher in the system for 20 years and just an amazing person. And I think you call out some very stark, you know, realities about how ineffective this system is for the kids. Would you be willing to spend a minute or two and talk about what it does to the teachers? Because as someone who's had a fabulous teacher wife who I feel was actually chewed up by the system, I see the human cost is on both sides of the aisle here.
Yeah. Well, first, I'll talk about teachers as I knew them in the traditional system. And then I want to talk about what I think needs to be the new type of learning leader if we have hope moving forward. But no, Andrew, there's no doubt that the American teacher is beat up right now. I can't think of much that we haven't held them responsible for. They have become, you know, the whipping post for American education. Anything that goes wrong, what's that? Shit slides downhill. It's going to end up in the classroom in our system. And I've seen that. I saw that when I was region superintendent. I tried not to do it in my region, but there were 4 other regions in the district. And I don't know whether we can ever fix that. I know the 2 learning coaches that we hired came out of HISD. And you want to talk about 2 professionals that felt liberated. Just having this question asked of them. Well, how would you like to spend the money? That question is never asked of a teacher, ever. I mean, I've been in meetings with teacher leadership, teacher unions. That question, how do you want to spend the money?
Right.
So let me address the second part. I think most teachers today are ill-fitted for what we need them to do. And so we have to get fast about re-engineering what we need adults to do for kids. And what we don't need any longer are adults that know stuff and that they want to tell it to people. That is, for the most part, a colossal waste of time. And may I add, it is insulting to the learner to pretend that you know more about what that young learner can access on his or her cell phone. Now, the problem, because we kind of lived this when we tried to scale up the personalized learning lab school, we tried to move from 50 to 500 kids. So we needed to find learning coaches. We needed to find, I guess, 20 in addition to the 2 that we had already found. I met with the dean of a college of education, and I had basically outlined a 30-hour master's degree in learning design. I basically handed it over to the dean and said, this is the type of adult that we're going to need moving forward. You know what that dean said to me? Well, this looks great, Scott. I can tell you that you did a lot of work, but we're not going to be able to do this because the districts aren't buying it. No one in the district is going to hire an adult like this. So if we can't figure out how to do that, I think we've got a whole bunch of adults that are not only dinosaurs now, they will continue to be dinosaurs, especially in the eyes of the kids that they most want to help. And that's the children that are in their classroom.
Just cheering on everything you say, Scott.
I want to tell you, I'm also nicknamed by my friend Matt Barnes as the Grim Reaper. So if this gets too morbid, just let me know.
It's debating whether I'd rather get COVID than be depressed.
Yeah.
No, we'll only start to heal once we're honest about the disease. That's my attitude.
Amen.
Kath, anything other than equity before we dive into the equity piece?
Oh, look, so much of what you said, Scott, resonated. And, you know, for me, it's all about these children being heard. It's about sort of understanding the essence of each person in the system and developing the human capital you've got. And it's such a depressing vision to see, and even think about having 30 kids in a room where their essence isn't allowed to flourish, and then the teacher not either, right? Like it's such a lose-lose situation. And the solution is actually it seems when you're outside of the system, it seems something that's very, very possible. So, you know, I'm just feeling for, you know, everyone out there right now. So
I'm gonna add one other. I'm gonna add one other thing. I'm gonna pile on a little deeper. All of what we're teaching them or trying to teach them is useless, and that what they need to learn are the collaborative skills, are the communication skills, are the technology skills, right, that allow them to succeed in this world today. And so much of what we have prescribed and are trying to teach them are leftover things that we've been teaching them for 30 or 40 or 50 years. And that they're actually not only we're wasting their time and losing their unbelievably adept minds and not giving them the skills that they really do need to succeed in this world.
Mm-hmm.
So we're measuring them on mathematics. Well, you know something? I competed for mathematics Olympiad, right? Another day went by and I didn't use y equals mx plus b. What is wrong with us as an entire world that we're so obsessed with this thing that was invented 4,000 years ago? And yes, I love math. I was an electrical engineer. I built a high-tech company. But you know something? It's not the only literacy that matters. There's so many more out there that we are not giving our kids that they do need to succeed in the world.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
you know
I just,
what? Sorry.
yeah, go ahead, Kat.
No, I'm just going to say that it doesn't have to be a throwing everything out, right? Like, why can't we do it all? We have time. We could do some of, you know, what parents feels really important, what the children feel important, what the teachers are feeling is important. They just need more time to really have that time to discover who they are and what they're interested in, and really understanding themselves enough to be able to craft a niche for themselves in the world.
Yeah.
Doing what they can monetize.
I was on a webinar this past week, and the leadership of the Agency of Education here in Vermont was leading the webinar, and they introduced the portrait of a graduate. And a friend of mine, Susan Sclafani, who was the deputy superintendent when I was in HISD, she worked with Rod Page. She was on the call, and I chatted with her just between the two of us that we were working on portrait of graduates in the 1990s in HISD. So there's two problems with this. One, a huge problem inside the system is that it is cyclical, right? When people like me get to be my age, you've been sort of within the system long enough that you sort of see the same conversation, the same products coming up. The problem with the portrait of a graduate is, and we did this actually when I was West Region Superintendent back in the early part of this century. We took a look at what the expectations were for a graduate, and then we did a side-by-side comparison of the credit structure in order to graduate from a state, a Texas public school. And you know what we found? Totally not aligned. So the expectations that we want in a portrait of a graduate, I think we saw about 35% alignment to what kids were working on each and every day that they were in our schools.
Huge issues. First, welcome, Lucy. Good to see you again. And we won't have time to go deeply into the equity issue, Scott, but one based on your earlier remarks, one interpretation is, oh, the problem with equity is we don't have enough, Hispanic or Black legislators or superintendents or teachers, and all we need to do is work harder to get the right representation at whatever level. Would that give us equity in the public schools or not?
No. It might help in certain areas. I think one of the issues that we're struggling with right now in American public education is what I call the boutique syndrome. We are so desperate for success out of public education that we will celebrate schools that have 120 kids. We'll celebrate districts that have 3,000 kids. I remember one night, I was at a banquet. Wendy Kopp was there, and it was the 20th anniversary of Teach for America being in HISD. And they were raising millions of dollars. And there were some big, heavy hitters in the room. And Wendy made this statement. She said, congratulations, Houston. We just hired our 2000th Teach for America intern over the past 20 years for HISD. So you know what happens to me? I start running the numbers. Because if you're the general superintendent in HISD, potentially you have 10,000 fire and hire moves that you can make every year in HISD because there's 10,000 teachers. 10,000 teachers over 20 years is 200,000 potential moves. And we are in a room where there's millions of dollars being raised for a group that has 1% market penetration. 1%. And that group was raising millions of dollars. We have to get out of this boutique attraction. And we have to start looking at scale. And really the only way, Michael, that I see scale is to get kids, especially poor kids, the hell out of the system. I wrote a blog a couple weeks ago. If you love your kid, go down and immediately check them out of your school.
Good for you.
I don't see any other way other than zero basing this, right? And what we need is we need thousands of workspace education and noble explorers, right? Just to penetrate the market, right? So that families can see their niche. Their niche is, it's no longer these places called school districts or schools. Yeah, and sometimes I get this question, do you see a future for any school? And the answer is yes, I do see. But I don't see those places controlling market share the way that they are currently controlling market share today. I think the longer that goes, the worse it is for families of this country.
Totally agree. And because we've only got 15 minutes left, I want to open it up. Does anybody have additional questions for Scott? I mean, I can always ask endless questions, but Andrew, Kath, or Robert, Nina, Lucy?
Thank you for sharing, Scott.
Well,
this is a really honest, refreshing inside view. And I hope those that are listening, they might be a little shaken right now because you've got such a brutally honest, it might be so discordant with their understanding of what's happening, but I think it might be the start of their own learning pathway and helping them understand where they need to bring their kids in order for them to succeed. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, go ahead, Kath.
No, I'm just going to say that most people really trust their schools, but they're not really allowed inside. So we just assume that everything is okay, right? And if there's something wrong, it's usually something wrong with our children. And, you know, I've been listening to different focus groups around the country, and all of these focus groups start off talking about school and like, this is an institution they trust, and they don't ever like go into the negative territory. But by the time you get to like, you know, point 30 or 30 minutes into the conversation, that's when they start trusting each other, and they really start letting out, you know, all the things that they would like to see improved, that are wrong, that they don't really know about, that they are confused about, that they're unpacking when their child gets home. So, you know, if you are out there and you're thinking, I know something's wrong, I just don't really know what it is. You know, it is like, just like Andrew said, so refreshing to see someone from the inside actually admitting that there are real structural problems in there that are harming children. My question for you, Scott, is like, when you say, if you have a child, go down and pull them out of school right now, what do you want them to do then? Like, what would be their next step? Step 2 after pulling their children out of school, what would you suggest?
Yeah, so this is kind of what the education game does. We work with parents to help them build courage to not just pull their kids out of schools that aren't working for their kids, but to have the courage to have the conversation with others, either in their immediate neighborhood or in their virtual neighborhood, that feel the same way, and then start building learning plans. You know, schools aren't magical, right? Schools are working on learning plans. You know, a set of parents can do the same thing. You know, and I know parents work, right? I know that. But I also know that a set of 5 parents, a set of 5 families in Houston, Texas, just launched a micro school, and they made a promise to each other. They all quarantined, so they're all safe. They're all in this little bubble, right? So we're the 5 families. Lucy is gonna take the 5 kids Monday. Kath is going to take the 5 kids Tuesday. Michael's going to take the 5 kids Wednesday. Andrew's going to take them Thursday, and I'm going to take them Friday. So everybody gets 4 days of work, 1 day of, I think it's called Black Magic Girls School. Awesome story. So, like, my question to this group is, what's preventing that from scaling exponentially?
I would say confidence. The resources are there. Sometimes we talk about how collectively we know of incredible resources that are available. You and Matt do as well. And so I think for those of us who know the resources, this is easy to do. But I think the other piece is confidence on the part of parents, and I know you and Matt are working on that, but also credibility. And I love you admit that there's no magic to, you know, school, but most parents, actually, I'm going to tease Andrew a little bit. Almost every call, Andrew says, I don't have any education credentials. And, you know, the system does that to people. The system likes to say, oh, if you don't have education credentials, you don't know how to do this. So can you speak to how we can shift the perception so everybody knows they can create a Black Magic Girls School if they want? How do we change that?
Well, I'll tell you what, I think there's at least what I hear up here in Vermont, there are way more parents talking about Black Magic Girls School Now, they're not talking about Black Magic Girls School because we don't have a lot of African Americans up here, but they're talking about their own learning systems. And the reason why they are is because of what they saw last spring. And Kath is absolutely right? And that is part of the magic of school was that there were a bunch of parents that had never seen school since they themselves had graduated from school. Well, last spring, they got to see it up close and personal. And whether you were a poor parent or a rich parent, what you saw coming home wasn't good. So, so Matt and I talk about this a lot at the education game. The race is on, right? And that is how many of these learning pods or micro schools can launch before the vaccine brings this pandemic down. Because when that pandemic goes down, people, I think you're right, Michael, people are going to feel the urge, the pull to go back to these places called school. And I just hope we can make a sizable dent in that market share.
I would say,
can I say one more thing?
Yeah,
quick?
no, please do.
Okay,
I'm sorry,
so
I
I
keep
wanted
butting
to
in.
thank Andrew for, I guess complimenting me being as forthright as I have been tonight, and I will continue to be. But Matt Barnes, my partner at the education game, and we had a come to Jesus meeting. The blog that I wrote, if you love your kid, go down and check them out of school. Matt told me, he said, I don't think you can say that. And you know what I said to Matt? Matt, this is the civil rights issue of the 21st century, right? And if we can't get the language right, and we can't draw the line in the sand right, I have interviewed for school superintendent positions up here. I will tell you that when I start talking this language, they look like I'm from Mars. Which is fine. Okay, Kath, sorry. I just wanted to get that out.
No. And I've been speaking not fondly, I guess, like in my mind, I'm not speaking that fondly about schools, but relative to you guys, I think you see me as someone who loves schools. But I have to say, I haven't been in American schools very much. I've been in Montessori schools, and I certainly haven't been in them lately. But I do get stories from parents who have had their children in there, and they're saying things like, even what the teacher is saying is being scripted. And I have actually visited schools where I've actually seen it being completely scripted. And I couldn't even imagine living, showing up to school day in, day out, having to read from a script and keeping everything to this, to 5 minutes and 2 minutes and 1 minute. That is
the sadness of what we're putting our kids and our teachers through. By the way, the only profession where you can get a master's degree and be told what to do for 5 minutes of every day.
Yeah. And
and also, and Andrew has spoke to this before, the importance of relationships around learning.
I was going to say the same thing.
Hugely important. You know how we build relationships in traditional school space? Kids get a schedule, teachers get a roster. Build a relationship. Oh, by the way, you've got 45 minutes a day to do that. With 30 kids in the class. Now, when I start talking about things like this, I don't have very many people who argue with me about these stories. These stories make sense to people. But going back to Michael's point, I think this is like the, $128,000 question. And that is, So people sit there and they shake their heads yes, but then tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, they're going to send their kid right back to that space. And it's not as bad when you send them into what I would call a non-toxic space, but especially for our little babies, from single mother families, from minority neighborhoods, we aren't sending them into non-toxic places. We're sending them into places that are toxic. If this was a medical analogy, we would basically say, you can't go there because you are going to get sick, little girl. You have to stay away from that place. But we have state laws that make it compulsory, right? So if those kids don't go to school, that poor parent gets a visit by the truancy officer. Now, you know, when I start talking about these stories, people just like, really? Yeah, these are the stories of our current public school system. And it's got to stop.
Hallelujah. I want to promote a movement called Mama Bear Revolution, hashtag Mama Bear Revolution, analogous to Mothers Against Drunk Driving. So just like a bunch of moms got together and said, it's unacceptable that people are getting killed at the rate they are on the streets. It's unacceptable that kids get damaged the way they get damaged at schools. You know, so how do we get more public school educators to be as outspoken and forthright as you are, Scott? In a few minutes left. Can you like create a reformed group or something?
Yeah, I think money is the issue. I don't think there are enough folks that are able to be creative in this space because they can't get access to the right dollars to help them with their creativity. I'll give you an example. New School Venture Fund. And oh, by the way, I really like New School Venture Fund, but in most states, in order to be called a school and get state money, you have to either be a charter or a member of a district. There are a lot of creative thinkers out there that when you say charter or member of district, that is a non-starter for them. You know, New School Venture Fund, right? Stacy Childress once told me that they weren't really interested in venturing into anything that didn't have public dollars associated with it.
Oh, well, no,
hold on a minute. So, let me get my Grim Reaper hood.
There we go.
Up here.
There we go.
Yeah.
No, I'm thinking how we can blast your voice out, you know, from your mouth.
Okay, let me give you
every
a quick
politician's
answer.
ears.
The way to start is we have to get lots and lots of kids out of the current system. If that doesn't happen, you know, and it's not that hard to create a new and different learning system. It's a little harder for poor parents. So that's one of the things that I'm really interested in. I know we're up on time, but my friend Amy Anderson in Denver, Colorado, Reschool, Colorado, they're going to have on the ballot a fund that poor families can access to build learning plans for their kids. And the way that they're going to pay for that is through a tax increment refinancing district or through a TERS, a zone. And without getting into the real specifics, these are public dollars based upon differing tax rates that poor families can access to start designing their own learning. I think that is a good first step of trying to erode the market share that public school districts currently have on the system.
But it is time, Scott, but we will definitely have you back. You are on my list of heroes again. So now I keep having an expanded list of heroes. No, the integrity to have stepped out and spoken the truth. Bless you. So thanks, everybody. This is another episode of When School's Not Working. We will see you next Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, and tell your friends. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thank
Michael.
you. Thank you, Scott.